And there are new developments this morning on the Korean Peninsula. South Korea's presidential office saying that North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un is vowing to shut down the country's nuclear test site next month, following a meeting between the leaders of the two nations last week. President Trump last night said that he had everything to do with this historic summit while speaking to a crowd of supporters in Michigan. This, as the president's own meeting, is in the making with Kim. Joining me right now is Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. He is a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Armed Services, and Budget Committees as well. Senator, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
It's pretty extraordinary, I have to say. North and South Korea vowed to end the Korean War in an historic accord. Your reaction?
It is historic to see the two leaders walk into each other's country. I never thought that would happen. You asked a question leading into this segment, can you trust Kim Jong-un? No, but you can trust him to do what's in his best interest and his cronies. Now, I think Trump has convinced him that the only way his regime will survive is for them to give up their nukes and in return end the Korean War so North Korea can have a more normal economy. President Trump, if he can lead us to ending the Korean War after 70 years and getting North Korea to give up their nuclear program in a verifiable way, deserves the Nobel Peace Prize and then some.
Yeah, will he get it? I mean, obviously, this is something that the mainstream media will push back at. But you're right. If this is actually materializing, what an enormous accomplishment for President Trump.
I want to be there. It may be the first time the Nobel Peace Prize was given and there was mass casualties, because I think a lot of liberals would kill themselves if they did that. But the bottom line is, by any objective measure, what President Trump has done is historic. He made a decision early on, Maria, and this was his most important decision about North Korea. He took containment off the table. He said to me and others early on, I'm not going to let them get a nuclear weapon that can hit America and contain the threat by threatening to blow North Korea off the map if they use it. He said to me real early in his presidency, I'm going to deny them the capability to hit America with a nuclear weapon. If they keep trying, I'll use military force as a last resort to stop them. So he chose denial. No other president has been that blunt, and that's why we are where we are, because China and North Korea believed that if Trump had to, he would use military force and North Korea would lose.
You know, I remember when I sat down with the president in an interview last year, it was last April, and we sat there talking about his meeting with the president of China, President Xi, and he said, we were having this delicious chocolate cake during dessert, and that's when I said to him, guess what, Mr. President, we just sent strikes to Syria. And that was the beginning of him presenting the fact that America was serious, and they were not going to joke around when it comes to things like this, and China needs to be there. So how did China also participate in terms of getting Kim Jong-un to the table here? You know, I spoke with the chairman and CEO of the Blackstone Group, Stephen Schwarzman, and he basically said, bottom line is Kim Jong-un saw no out. Listen to what he said, Senator. I want to get your reaction.
The path they were on by threatening nuclear war against the United States, having the United States react to that, which anybody would, organizing a sanctions regime, which was very tough, and getting the support, the wider support of the world. And the Chinese have done a terrific job in terms of limiting goods and services that can go to Korea. That's their major way in for Korea to live. So if you were sitting in the Kim Jong-il position with all of those negative things happening, you'd want to find some way out of this.
Do you agree with that, Senator, that he saw no out? He had to do this. I mean, I know the president has had this tough talk, but what else got him to this position?
Well, so when the Chinese agreed to additional sanctions, which was pretty historic, I mean, these are really tough sanctions. Now, China's been cheating a little bit, too, but Trump has really been all over China. So when China agreed to additional sanctions on North Korea, that really brought their economy to a standstill. 90% of all trade in North Korea is with China. So the day that China turned off the spigot, North Korea really was in a box. But there's a double-edged sword here. Let's say that President Trump and Kim Jong-un meet, and Kim Jong-un tries to play Trump like everybody in the past. All the time we've had talks with North Korea, they say one thing and do another. We're very close to historic peace, but we also are very close to war, because if they try to play Trump, if Kim Jong-un meets with President Trump and goes back to his old way of doing business, we're on a path to war. And I hope China knows that, and I hope North Korea knows it. And if I were the North Koreans, I would not meet with Donald Trump unless I was deadly serious about giving up my nukes, because if you play Trump, you're going to be a big loser.
And what does this mean for Iran? We have an important deadline coming up, Senator, May 12th. The president will have to make a decision whether or not to renew this nuclear deal. What is Iran thinking this morning on the heels of all of this?
I'd flip it around. If we get out of this very bad deal with Iran, it will show North Korea and China that Trump is different than Obama. The number one thing President Trump has got to do is reset the world after 8 years of disaster. So the Iranian nuclear deal puts us on a pathway to a nuclear arms race in the Mideast. Why do I say that? Under the deal, Iran can enrich and reprocess uranium to make their fuel for nuclear power, but you just go one step beyond that, you make a nuclear weapon. 15 years down the road, there is no inspection regime to control reprocessing and enrichment, and the Arabs want nuclear power also, but we're telling the Arabs you can't enrich and reprocess uranium to make your own fuel, but we're allowing Iran to do that. That's crazy. This deal, unless it's changed, is going to create a nuclear arms race between the Iranians and the Arabs, and that's a nightmare for the world. So I hope President Trump will get a better deal or get out, and the North Koreans are watching us when it comes to Iran.
Yeah, I think that's a really great analysis there, because they will be watching very closely what happens on May 12th.
Yes.
Let me ask you about China. I am here in Los Angeles this week because I'm interviewing Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. That will be on tomorrow morning on Fox Business Network. He's going to China after the interview. He's taking a delegation. Mr. Lighthizer is going, as well as Larry Kudlow. What do you think they can get from China? What happens after this meeting?
I think we got put China on notice that Trump was serious about changing the relationship when it comes to trade. Nixon went to China to open up China to the world. Mnuchin is going to China to tell China, the leadership in China, that President Trump wants you to play by the world's rules. So President Trump is right to push back against intellectual property theft, closing Chinese markets, putting tariffs on our product that we don't put on their products, dumping steel into the world marketplace below cost. So President Trump is doing two things at once. He's working with China to stop the threat from North Korea, and China knows that if there's a war with North Korea, it's going to be in their backyard, not our backyard. And Mnuchin is going to China to say, hey, we want a better relationship, but you got to change your business practices. And I just really appreciate how tough President Trump has been when it comes to China. He's not doing anything unfair to China. He's trying to make China play fair. After all these years, somebody finally, thank God, is pushing back against China.
Yeah, but now it's a different era in China, right? President Xi,
Yeah.
He's going to be the leader there for the rest of his life. I was reading an article yesterday about this so-called list that they have. They're tracking their citizens, and if you do anything that is seeming to be against what the government wants, like, for example, if you smoke outside, your name goes on this list and you drop a few points, and it might be harder to get a mortgage. It might be harder. I mean, this list, because they're tracking the citizens. How does that change the dynamic for the U.S. trying to partner with China on trade?
Okay, you got to remember this. Dictatorships are about the dictator. Kim Jong-un cares more about him and his cronies than he does the North Korean people. So when you make it about him, when President Trump told little Rocket Man, if you keep threatening my country, I'm going to wipe you out, it made a difference. Now, China is a dictatorship in another form. You can't elect your leaders. There is no democracy. There is no free press. There is no open and fair elections. So what you got to make it about is stability. So what does China want the most? They've got a lot of people without Social Security, unemployment benefits. There is no Medicare in China. They got 1.23 billion people to feed every day. So if you put a tariff, if China puts a tariff on pork products coming from Iowa, it hurts Iowa farmers, but guess what? It hurts consumers in China. The Chinese are weaker than we are. They have a weak system when it comes to political expression. We have a strong system. We have a big economy. They have a coastal economy. These tariffs and closing markets in China is protectionism for China. If Trump is tough on China, China will give in before we will, because they need us more than we need them, and the Chinese consumer is hanging by a thread in the interior of the country.